Welcome to Pacific Mammal Research's Marine Mammal Highlight Series. We are a 501c3 research and education nonprofit studying marine mammals in the Salish Sea off Washington State. In this series, you will learn about different marine mammals as we discuss interesting facts about each species. This is our way to geek out, share some information, and have some fun. We hope you enjoy the series, and be sure to follow us on Instagram to vote for which animal we talk about next. And without further ado, welcome to the PacMam podcast. This week is a marine mammal highlight, and this week we are doing the Rissos dolphin. We'll talk about that pronunciation. Apparently, I was saying it wrong for so many years, I think. Maybe it's potato, I'm not sure, but that's what we're going with. So we're going to be talking about that's the one it won. It won fairly decisively in our on our poll. It was like 15-2, I think. The poor gray seal got no love this week, but I'm excited about the Rissos dolphin. So I'm Cindy.
I'm Kat.
And I'm Trevor.
And Trevor's going to start us off, as always, with kind of the background information. And these guys look really cool, and they're very different than most other cetaceans. So he'll talk a little bit about that before we move on to the diet and behavior and fun facts and things. So Trevor, start us off.
Cool. So Risso's dolphin, the range, I'll start out with that. They're actually found pretty much throughout the world. They tend to be in subtropical to subtropical areas, but their whole range goes from as far north as like Greenland and the Gulf of Alaska, all the way south to South America, to the tip of South America at least.
Yes, I think they're basically just not the poles.
Yeah,
for the most part.
They've been seen that far north, not quite at the poles, but
right.
And south, but generally equatorial and around that area. They are pretty much in every ocean and a few seas, like the Mediterranean Sea and the Red Sea.
Yeah, I'll be talking, a lot of the research has been done on the Mediterranean guys, that at least for the social stuff that I'm going to talk about.
Yeah, and they prefer deeper water along continental shelves, which I'm sure you'll talk about too, hunting wise and all that. But what they look like is they're kind of hard to miss or misidentify, I guess I should say.
It's true. Yeah, I don't think there's many cetacean species that you're like, well, it could be this one or this one.
Well,
and that's like, no, that's a Rissos dolphin.
Yeah.
You say that. I will actually talk about that in the fun facts a little bit, though.
Ooh, cool.
Okay. Well, in general, they are a dolphin, of course, and most dolphins have that pronounced snout that's distinguishable, but these guys don't really have that pronounced snout. Kind of like an orca. Orca don't have that long snout either, and they're a dolphin, but these guys are a dolphin, they don't have it. They have a pretty round or bulbous head as well. So imagine like a really large tubular dolphin without the snout. I mean, it's just kind of like,
if you just like
whale head, I guess is what I do, but maybe not quite as big.
Yeah, like they basically just cut off the rostrum, right?
Yeah.
And then just fill out the bulbousness around the whole thing. And then you got a Risso's head.
Size-wise, they can grow up to 13 feet and 1,100 pounds, which again is pretty big for a dolphin.
Yeah.
That being said, most of them are like 10 feet on average, but they can grow up to 13 feet. And that robust body that I mentioned kind of trickles down to a pretty thin tail and caudal peduncle area, with a really tall dorsal fin as well. Yeah,
that's one of the I think Kat's going to talk about that too.
Yeah, again,
right. Yeah,
just general descriptions here, but
but if you look at a picture, it does kind of look like the peduncle area right behind the dorsal fin and to the fluke is not of the same animal.
Right.
The front of it's like very big and like muscular, and then he's got skinny little legs.
It's like a football player.
Right, there you go. The big thick neck.
Right. Within that downward-ish mouth too, without that obvious nose rostrum area, they have weird teeth as well. So they generally have pairs of 2 to 7 teeth. I don't know how that varies so much from 2 to 7.
You know, teeth are weird. That happens in other species
It said no
too.
more. Yeah, no more than 7 pairs in the lower jaw.
Yeah,
and only in the lower jaw.
How does it? This guy only has 2, but this guy has 7. How does that work?
Yeah.
Well,
but
and it's
only
there's
lower jaw, like you said.
Yeah, there's other ones that have it like even with a lot of even porpoise teeth. They're like, well, there's anywhere between 30 and 40. It's like okay.
And that is low compared to other toothed cetaceans too.
Yes, and I'll talk about that a little bit with what they feed on. It kind of makes sense.
Exactly.
But they're like sperm whales, where it's just on the lower jaw.
exactly. Coloration wise, calves are born pretty dark colored, either gray or black or brown sometimes. And then they have basically like a white anchor shaped white patch on their belly. So if you look at the pectoral fins, it's kind of like to the mouth and the pectoral fins there, a little white patch. And then as they age, they tend to get lighter for a number of reasons. Both their skin gets lighter and then they just get covered in scars. That's why they're hard to misidentify, because I think they are the most scarred cetacean, really.
No, it's true. I mean, rake marks are common. That's what basically what most of those are, is that the teeth marks that they're fighting each other with. But lots of cetaceans have those, but they usually heal up, and they don't heal up in the way that they do on Rissos.
Yeah.
Right.
Rissos. Sorry, I knew I was going to do that.
So basically they're born dark, and then as they grow up, they get lighter and lighter to white based on both their, I think a little bit of skin coloration changes, but it's just they get covered in those white scars.
Well, what's interesting is I have a little tidbit on that, is that they think that it is due to the loss of pigment during the healing process of that, and they think that may have evolved to establish a social hierarchy.
Oh, wow. That's interesting.
So, yeah, I mean, which kind of makes sense if that is a big part of their social world, but you know, you could just look at them like, well, dude, look how white that guy is. That's the top.
Don't want to mess with that guy.
Right. Nope. And males do tend to have more of that. Some of the females will still have some like gray or brown on them, but the adult males will be very white.
And the males tend to be just a little bigger than females, but nothing that obvious.
It's kind of like porpoises where they're like, oh, well, they're different, but you wouldn't be able to see it.
In orchids for that matter too. I mean, you see a male come up and obviously see it's a male with that giant dorsal fin, but if it's
just the size,
like a juvenile male and with a curved dorsal fin, you can't really tell, right? So similar, but the dorsal fins are not like orca.
Yeah. Everybody's dorsal fin looks kind of the same for the
but big in general though.
Yeah, for the size, the relative size.
But yeah, that's what they look like, and again, hard to misidentify if you see them. And I think they're usually in groups of like 10 to 30, but I think you'll talk about that more. And
I'll talk more, but that's it. They can be in much larger groups, but that's kind of their
in general,
their average.
Yeah. But yeah, that's their description of where they live and what they look like and such.
Cool. Yeah, so they are pretty, like I said, unique looking, and I'll talk a little bit more about that and what they eat. But first, we're going to take just a short break. So we will be back. Welcome back. We're going to be moving on to the diet and behavior of the Rissos dolphin, and they are actually quite interesting, besides interesting looking.
I'm excited to hear about this part.
Yes, there's some cool stuff. So they do eat a few different species, foraging wise. They eat a few types of fish and some crustaceans, but most of their diet is cephalopods, right? So cephalopods are like your squid and octopus. And squid is their prey of choice. Basically, that's their diet. They love squid.
Do we know percentages at all? Or, I mean, I'm assuming they vary.
Yeah, no, when I was looking up some of the stuff, I didn't see anything blatant about like, it was this much percent, but it was.
I thought it's like 50 to 60%.
Okay.
Yeah.
At least in general, but that's the whole, the whole world. So.
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, that's the thing. It's
like 90%. I mean, it's like they're squid.
Yeah.
And that's like the first thing on every one. They're like squid, 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 squid. And
cool.
There's different types of squid too, depending on where they're at.
Really?
Of course. Yeah.
Yeah. And this kind of makes sense with their teeth again. So, like sperm whales are also giant squid eaters, massive. But they're not using those teeth for chewing. It's just for grabbing it. And then they I think they suction it a little bit, just like sperm whales do, and like belugas, I believe, because they don't really have teeth either very much.
Correct.
So they just suck it in. So I think that kind of makes sense as to why their teeth patterns. They don't need too many. People only have like two.
Not really for shredding. It's just for capture. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just for grabbing, and then they suck it in. And we'll talk a little bit more about those teeth in a minute, but it does make sense too of why they're nocturnal foragers, right? So they're mainly feeding at night, and squid are part of that deep scattering layer. which is that, basically layer of animals just kind of hangs out down in the depths of the ocean. And people used to think that like they mistook it for like the bottom of the ocean because it's so thick, like the depth sounders and stuff would actually bounce off of it. But then they saw that it moved. They're like, that's interesting.
How crazy would that be if you didn't really know what was down there yet, and you actually thought that was this bottom of the ocean, but it just undulated,
just randomly
moved up and down.
Yeah, that would be so terrifying. Cool. Like, what's going on with the world?
Right.
It's like the sky is falling, right? The sky is falling.
I know. Anyway, sorry, that was just amusing.
So they once they realized that, and they found that at night that deep scattering layer moves up, especially it'll even go up higher, I think, when it's like a full moon. They get attracted to the light. So the animals in there are feeding on the plankton and stuff that's there, and then it really makes it for the predators to be like, well, they're all there eating that. Well, I'm going to go there and eat them. So they like to feed at night on the squid that come up in that deep scattering layer, which is kind of cool. And as Trevor noted, they do like deeper water. And again, they're as we've talked about before, all these animals follow the prey, right? They need to eat, and it's tough being out there in the ocean. So they are found in deeper water up to 3,300 feet, and that's common, I think, too, for the squid and stuff like that live in those deeper water areas.
Yeah.
And so they can dive up to 1,000 feet, which is pretty good.
Yeah, it's pretty deep.
Yeah. And hold their breath up to 30 minutes. But because the prey is coming up to them, they don't really have to do that much. So they usually have, shorter dives, shallower dives, which is fairly common. Like anytime we say like, well, they can dive as deep as this, that's the record. That's not usually what happens.
Right.
I mean, I work on a whale watching boat, for those wondering, and I say the same thing to people like, yeah, these humpbacks can dive for 30 minutes, but they usually don't. But that's when they do. But
right, exactly.
Right, I was gonna say.
Yeah.
I thought you said it was rare. Well,
just
kidding. Well,
anyway.
and cetaceans like to make us liars. Like, this is what they do, and then they'll just not do that. Yeah. So before they dive, they'll take up to 10 to 12 breaths at a time, or in a row, about 15 to 20 seconds apart. So, getting all that oxygen that they need to stay down for however long they're going to. And what I thought was interesting is that they'll actually fluke up. So when they dive, they actually lift their flukes up out of the water, their tail, and swim down. And not a ton of smaller dolphin species really do that often.
I was going to say, not orca obviously are the biggest dolphin. They don't fluke. They are so back, but they don't fluke.
Right. You'll see it like, oh, it's going to come out, and no, it doesn't.
Right. Yeah, we call it a peduncle dive, where you see that back part of the tail stalk, but you don't really see the tail.
Yeah, exactly. So I thought that was interesting that they will actually do that, which is kind of cool. I don't think I've seen them before, and I have not seen their flukes like that, but
no, me neither.
I've only seen them like once, so I am an expert. I am not. So they don't just use those flukes for diving. They are quite social, and we're learning more and more about their sociality from some long-term research, especially that's in the Mediterranean, as I mentioned before. So there's this Jonian dolphin conservation group, and I'll talk about them in a minute. But they've been doing work for the last 20 years looking at these animals, and they're very active at the surface, much like other dolphin species. They will leap, they will slap their flippers and flukes, they'll even spy hop, which is super cute. So this big bulbous head just like sticking out of the water. But they are aggressive towards one another. And so back to those teeth, some of it is kind of a mating display where they are aggressive towards each other. And I think that's also why males tend to have more of it than females.
Sure.
The males could be aggressive to females, but they're really going to be aggressive to the males because they're trying to, get with the female. Like I need to win. So, so those are the main cause of those rake marks. There are some, there's some of the prey. So there's the squid that they eat. They've got beaks. So that could cause them. And I saw somewhere that they don't know what the size of the squid that they're eating is, but some of the species that they found, one of them can grow up to like 13 feet.
Oh my gosh, that's as long as the potential.
Yeah, so I'm sure they're not eating that size, but when, what's the cap? Like, they're eating juveniles, but up to what size? We don't know.
A lot of squid too, they have basically hooks on their tentacles as well.
Yes.
Oh, that's right.
So
Yep.
you don't really see a ton of those circle scars like you do on sperm whales, the sections, but it could be just, fighting back and dragging, and
Right. Right.
Oof,
that makes sense. Yeah. So there could be some of that, and there could be, other predators, if they get snapped on by some larger toothed whale or whatnot, and parasites and disease, and that could go into that. But most of it is because they are just kind of beating each other up, is why they get those rake marks. So the one thing that's great about those scars, for any of us that do photo ID on these individuals, we always, it's sad when you see that they have scars, but you're also like, yay, we can ID you again.
I was going to say that would actually be quite hard with them though, if they're accumulating scars at that rate.
Well, but this thing is that these scars are stable for years. Like they've
oh yeah, but I just mean if you have new ones over the top of the ones that you were using, it's still, there still be a lot of nuance to that.
Yeah, potentially. It's like with anything, some animals are going to be really easy to ID and really stable, and other ones are going to get marks more often that cover up other marks. Because it's really if those marks get covered up by other ones.
Exactly.
If you have more around the body, then you're just adding marks. So I thought about that too, but they have done, there's a paper that talked about the longevity of the marks and being able to use them for photo ID, and it was very valid. Most of the time it's the adults, the juveniles have less markings, for obvious reasons, that they're not ready to mate yet, and so don't need to have all that interaction. But they are able to do this, and that's what that Jonian Dolphin Conservation Group does. And they have an automated ID system, which is really cool.
Wow.
Yeah, using it's we'll have the link in the program notes, but it's called Dolphin, DOLFIN. So if you search for that, you should be able to come up. They do that, and I think sperm whales, they have another one, but I think that's the only ID program for Risso's dolphins.
So it's kind of like Happy Whale in that aspect of
kind of like Happy Whale. Yeah, like it pulls it up, and then it is specifically for Rissos, so it's looking at the scarring patterns and the dorsal fin, to be able to find all those marks.
Very cool.
So with that, they've learned a lot more about their social status and their social structure, because they can know the individuals, right? That's why that's so important, and that's why we do our work with photo ID. You can't know the social structure unless you know the players. So they, again, Trevor mentioned 10 to 30 or 50 individuals. I saw two kind of caps on that on different sites, but generally smaller-ish groups, but they can be found alone, and they can be found in super pods of up to thousands of individuals. So huge amounts. Whoa. Yeah. What's interesting is these guys have, and this word came up, and I hadn't really heard of it before. They have a stratified social structure. Yeah, and I'm all about social structure, and I was like, oh, what does that mean? Because most dolphin species have a fission fusion where they're living in groups that constantly change, but you have some long-term relationships usually within that. But it's just like you go to work in the morning, you're with your work friends, then you go to lunch and you have go out with somebody else, and then you go home and you have your family. So throughout the day you have these changes, but these guys are a little different. This stratified, within the larger groups, they have these smaller stable subgroups, and the individuals are very loyal to these subgroups, very high fidelity.
Dolphin clicks.
Yeah. Yeah, basically. And so what's funny is it's almost like is it West Side Story or Grease or no, I think West Side Story, where you have like the group of males that are like dun, 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 dun. So the adult males have these long-term bonds and are very loyal to those adult male groups, and then mothers and cows will group together and hang out, and that's fairly common. But they're not sure how, if after they don't, when they don't have a calf, are they still in that group, or do they go somewhere else and then come back to the group when they have a calf again? They're still don't understand that completely. But the males have their groups, the mothers and calves have their groups. Those are really stable, high fidelity. They don't leave those groups very often. But the juveniles are like, I don't need to be tied down yet. Let's go party. So the juveniles have much less fidelity, and so they can join and leave groups and do whatever juvenile Risso's dolphins do.
Spread the gene pool.
Well, not yet. They're not ready to do that yet, but they're.
Well, I mean, eventually if they leave, but yeah.
Yeah, they're scoping out their. Well, and they're looking like, oh, am I going to be with that group? Am I going to be,
Right. I was going to say, yeah, it's like a learning process for them too.
Yeah. And learning how to, how do you get into that clique, right? What's the procedure? So
what's the initiation process?
Right, exactly.
Right. Secret handshakes.
The applications,
right?
Yeah.
Secret fluke shakes. Exactly. So reproduction wise, they're basically like, they don't know much. I saw one that they're sexually mature around 10 years of age. It was like 8 to 10 for females and 10 to 12 for males. But other ones said that they don't have an age, they only have the length. So from 8.5 to 9 feet is when they're sexually mature.
Which is probably around the age, I wonder.
Yeah, it's probably around the age, but like it's interesting that some specifically did not say an age range, and they only said when they're this big.
So, yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah. And I don't know if they've done teeth aging, that's a fairly common way to age animals, but they don't have that many of them. So maybe when they strand or whatnot, they don't have teeth left. I don't know. They carry their babies for a little over a year, 13 to 14 months, and on average every 2.5 years. The breeding and calving may occur year round, but they do have peak calving periods, but they vary geographically. So in Japan, it's summer to fall, but in California, it's fall to winter. So
that makes sense too, just based on the location and the water temperatures and such.
Right. So my last little part here, I'm super excited about because I did not know this, but they have hybrids. There are hybrids between Rissos and bottlenose dolphins.
Which they don't look much alike at all.
No, they do not. And they exist in captivity, and apparently they found them in the wild as well. And I just thought that was super cool because that's another example of an intergenus mating, right? You have the false killer whale that the bottlenose dolphin mated with. So this is Tursiops truncatus, and then it's Grampus gracius.
Gracius, yeah.
Gracius, okay. So you're not even within the same genus in taxonomy wise. You're stepping outside that, and you can still mate. So I would love to see. I didn't get to look up what a baby Risso's bottlenose dolphin looks like, but
do they have a name for them? Like how they'll combine
the
two
Wolfen,
names?
right? We had the Wolfen,
right?
Yeah. I don't know. They didn't say that. Basically, all I found was that they happen.
Right. Interesting.
So, yeah, I don't know.
It's hard with the guy's name being in the dolphin name.
Right.
So the
cool.
hybrids that exist may be a result because they have a tendency to hang out with other species. So mixed species groups of cetaceans aren't as uncommon as we thought they were to begin with, right? The more we're out there, the more we find these groups that are together that are different species. But these guys tend to do it a lot. So they will harass and surf the bow waves of gray whales, which I thought was so cool.
That's interesting.
Like it's like a giant. So you're just like, I'm just gonna go ride the wave on this giant. So cool. And I wonder if the gray whales are like, oh, they're back again.
Yes.
Right. Oh my gosh.
Get away. Why? You're so annoying, like little mosquitoes. And then interestingly, in the Mediterranean, in the Gulf of Corinth, I got to be out with not out there, but they came out on a boat that I was in the Bahamas, the people who did the research for this. But they have found Rissos associated with striped dolphins and common dolphins. And what's interesting is they only saw the Rissos, and I believe the striped dolphins, I can't remember that specifically, but definitely the Rissos were only seen there when they were in mixed species groups.
Huh.
Interesting.
Yeah, so not sure what's going on with them. But they like to hang out together apparently. So that was kind of cool. And it's commonly noted that Rissos will form traveling pods at sea with other dolphin species. So again, they just kind of say that. I didn't have time to go in depth as to all the different ones that they found. But I kind of think like, well, I guess they're just the social butterflies of the cetacean.
I was gonna say, yeah, it's like, okay, well, I just like to be, hanging out with all the different peeps here.
Yeah, just like to hang out with everybody. Equal opportunity. Cool. Yeah. So that's the cool stuff about them. But now we have more fun facts brought to you by
Yeah. So so first of all, let's talk a little bit about their status. So like Trevor and Cindy both mentioned, they are found throughout almost all of the world. And as far as we know, they're not threatened. They're listed as a species of least concern by the IUCN. They are protected by the Marine Mammal Protection Act throughout their range, and also the CITES Appendix 2 throughout their range as well. And I guess they're under a specific annex document in the wider Caribbean region as well that offers them protection in that specific region. In terms of threats, many of these are similar to many of the other ones that we've mentioned in our previous cetacean marine mammal highlights episodes. So obviously climate change is a big one for these guys. Like Cindy said, marine mammals follow the prey. And so climate change for all species is a problem in terms of their prey, because a lot of times that will impact the prey species where they're found. These guys might be in a little bit of a better situation because they are found in a much wider range. But equally, it's hard if you know that you can go to a certain spot and always get prey, and then all of a sudden you can't. That's a huge problem.
Yeah, and it depends on if their social learning and how their social structure is as to who knows that information.
Exactly.
And if they're really, if they can be variable on that.
Exactly. Yeah, which we don't really have a good handle on right now with that species. Another major threat is entanglement in fishing gear. This is also a pretty common occurrence. Unfortunately, again, they have a wide range, and a lot of that overlaps with fishing activity.
And they had, I read where there's I think off Catalina, there was a group that specifically was around other the squid boats, basically. And they went with there was another species there. I think it was the false killer whale.
But they do seem to follow sometimes. Like they'll figure out if there is a fishery in an area, and again, like you said, because they are so partial to squid, that would make a lot of sense.
Yeah, exactly.
So they are susceptible to things like gill nets, long lines, and trawls. Those are particularly detrimental for these guys. Hunting is another big one. So these guys are included in annual hunts in the following countries, which I actually listed them out. So these guys are still hunted for meat in Indonesia, in Japan, in parts of the Caribbean, Sri Lanka, and the Solomon Islands.
Didn't realize that.
Yeah, and so most of them are hunted for meat. Occasionally, some live animals are taken and sold to aquariums around the world as well. And actually, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that is one where it is one of the other few species besides bottlenose dolphins that will be found in captivity. They are a bit hardier, I guess. There's still not a lot of them, but that compared to other cetacean species, they're more common. Right,
and this makes more sense too. If they are still being actively hunted, there's more opportunity to catch them and impart them to other locations. So I'm sure many of you listening have heard of the movie The Cove. Pretty hard-hitting movie, but Taiji in Japan is a major location where these hunts occur, and Risso's dolphins are often part of that annular hunt that they do.
I think that, and after The Cove was out, they stopped doing the bottlenose dolphin one for a little while, but I think they still did I think they did pilot whales as well.
Yeah, they do pilot whales, Risso's dolphin, and I believe it's about a 6-month hunt period that they are allowed to hunt for about 6 months. So it's kind of like, it's like any other moderated hunt period, right? Where it's like, oh, this is hunting season. So apparently, at least in Japan, which is the one that I looked up, they do have about a 6-month period where they're allowed to hunt these whales, or dolphins rather.
Yeah.
So there's that. So that's another source of threat, obviously, for these guys. Ocean noise is also a big one. So this is very detrimental for a lot of species. And these guys in particular are susceptible, it seems, to sonar, and specifically like naval sonar testing. So that can prompt animals to strand, or to basically have you run away, right? So you hear this sound that sounds like a potential predator, and it causes a flee response. And that can basically mean that the animal ends up doing dive behavior that's not normal. And that a lot of times can end up in basically air bubbles accumulating in their blood and death potentially. So I guess these guys are susceptible to that.
Yeah, if you were diving and a giant shark came by, you're like, oh my God! And you
right.
and
you forget your training and you shoot to the top, and then
you don't get eaten by the shark, but you get bubbles in your blood, and that's not good.
Yeah, never a good thing. So these guys are susceptible to that as well, apparently. And then contaminants is another big one. Again, you know, these guys are found through many of the world's ocean and seas, and they are relatively long-lived. They can live up to about 30 years, I believe.
Yeah, it was 39.6 was the oldest individual that they knew. So
yeah, so I think the kind of average is around about 25 to 30.
Yeah.
So again, that's relatively long-lived. So that's a long time of potentially accumulating these contaminants, which are stored in the fat layer, the blubber. And if they are then in nutritional stress at any point and they metabolize that fat, they're getting dosed with contaminants. So like many of the marine mammals that we've already talked about that have blubber stores, this is an ongoing problem basically. So with that, those are all the threats that I had. So let's talk about some fun facts.
yes.
So first of all, you might be wondering, especially with our intro of how to say the name,
Risso.
why are they called Risso's dolphins? So these guys are actually named after a French-Italian naturalist named Antoine Risso, who was alive from 1777 through 1846. And apparently his name was also given to several different fish species too. So I guess he was out to discover.
Right. Cool.
And he was, which I didn't have time to look into this further, but it said that he first described this species to another researcher with the last name of Cuvier. And I was like, oh, I wonder if that's the gentleman I wonder if that was the gentleman who named the Cuvier's beaked whale.
Yeah.
So I'd have to look it up. I didn't have time to look that up while I was doing this research, but I thought that was kind of neat.
Interesting. I mean, I don't think that would be a fairly common name. So
right, and it's around about the same time period, so that would make sense. So Mr. Risso gave his name to this dolphin species, and his Latin name, which, as Cindy already said, is Grampus griseus. Grampus is a combination of the Latin word for large or great and Pisces, which means fish. So Grampus is like a fusion word, basically meaning large fish. And griseus means grizzled or gray mottled.
Oh, well, that's very appropriate.
Pretty darn accurate. So they are also this is a little bit of a nuanced statement, but they are the biggest delphinid that is still called a dolphin. Right. So obviously, as we all know, the killer whale is the largest species of dolphin, but these guys are actually the largest one that is still called a dolphin, which is a little bit pedantic, but
the same thing with pilot whales too. They're dolphin, but we call them pilot whale.
Right.
Exactly. And actually part of that is that the Risso's dolphins are sometimes considered part of the blackfish group, which is sort of a subspecies of large delphinids, which includes pilot whales, killer whales, pygmy killer whales, and the melon-headed whales. Which I think is very interesting because those guys all kind of look relatively similar. And then you have the Risso's dolphin that are kind of the outlier, like on the edge, like we're kind of like these guys, but we're also kind of not.
We got a fun fin. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's funny. So Trevor, when you were saying they're really hard to mistake, that's true if you see the body. Exactly. If you only see the dorsal fin, because it's so large for their size, apparently people regularly mistake it for an orca fin.
Oh, that would make sense. I mean, it's not that big, but yeah.
No, but again, if you have no context of the animal underneath, and they are found, their range overlaps with a lot of orca ranges as well. So sometimes they can be mistaken, but only really if you are just seeing the fin.
And I assume orca will attack Risso.
I believe so.
I'm sure they would. I don't think I've heard them as like that's a species that they've eaten, but
I mean, if they'll eat minke whale, they'll probably eat that.
Yeah, I don't think it's like specifically targeted, but I have heard of attacks on them before.
I got to look up that Diane Claridge paper because that was one where they had an orca in the Caribbean that went around and ate 3 different species in one day. And it could.
I think they've had reports of this like off. I want to say like off Hawaii or something as well, where they were actually like, I have definitely seen pictures of a mammal eating killer whale, like tossing a Risso's dolphin.
Okay.
Yeah. So it does
toss
occur.
their food and don't eat it, but
that is very true. They're a little bit like large cats sometimes.
Seriously.
So this one's really fun. I actually had no idea about this story, but it's really cool. So a Risso's dolphin named Pelorus Jack became famous in New Zealand. Apparently, this is in the early 1900s, and I guess he actually would guide boats across Cook Strait in New Zealand.
What?
So he became kind of like the local favorite dolphin, and apparently he sparked the first governmental protection for a cetacean because someone fired a rifle at him in 1904, and people were like up in arms. They're like, "How dare you target Pelorus Jack? Government, do something." So
Wow.
yeah, and obviously because I grew up in Scotland, I had to throw this in there. Apparently, they named a Scottish ceilidh dance after Pelorus Jack.
Oh.
So personally, I don't recall ever having danced to Pelorus Jack, but apparently that's a thing you can do if you go to a ceilidh. So maybe I should request that next time I'm back in Scotland.
You should. I would like to dance the Pelorus Jack, please.
I have no idea what I'm doing, but I know the name of it.
See, but that also, just goes to show the power of the individual, right? Because you know these individuals, it becomes, if it was just some random animal that they didn't know, nobody would have cared. But because that individual they knew and cared about that one. So by knowing them, that's why this photo ID and knowing the individuals is so important for all these species.
Yeah, and especially cool because again, this was kind of a symbiotic relationship in the sense that the dolphin would guide the boats across this. Cook Strait can be pretty sketchy, especially back in the early 1900s when your technology was fairly limited for for navigation.
No motorboats and things.
Right.
Rare.
So very cool. And then the last little fun fact that I had is that the Rissos dolphins do, very similar to bottlenose dolphins, they do have unique frequencies of call. So we have like the signature whistle in bottlenose dolphins that we know of, which is a unique identifier to an individual. And these guys have something very similar where they have a specific frequency of call that an individual makes, and that's how you know it's that individual. So it's almost like knowing that specific pitch of voice is that animal.
It's almost like on a ham radio. You have a specific, don't you? For ham radios, I was wondering, you have maybe not. So you have a specific call sign, but having a specific, like, I'm calling on this frequency right here, and so you know that it's me versus calling on this. Well, you switch channels like on boat radios,
sure.
So you know who you're talking to, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and it makes a lot of sense, like you said. I mean, they're hanging out in a lot of times larger groups and or groups of other species too. So it makes sense that you would need a way to identify which one is a con-specific and then which one it is.
Right.
So those were all my fun facts. And then I think we're just going to end today a little bit differently because, you have another fun fact.
I do have one. Well, I did, as we're doing this, I looked up the hybrid.
Oh, okay, go for it.
In the wild. And I'll link to this in the show notes as well. But they had a larger pod of 25 bottlenose dolphins, including a single adult Rissos and 3 calves, one of which resembled a Rissos calf. And then there's this adult 2 apparent bottlenose dolphins surfacing together. However, the dolphin shows atypical features, including a shorter beak and a more pronounced head shape reminiscent of a Rissos. So it basically looks like a bottlenose dolphin that you just took the rostrum, the beak, and just squished it. It's like,
poor little guy.
And he's got this big, robust body. Like, he's not as streamlined as, bottlenose dolphins can be pretty chunky too, but it's not as it looks more like the top half of a Rissos. And then the dorsal fin to me actually looks quite larger too. It's really kind of elongated and taller. So pretty interesting.
That's neat.
And interesting that it was with a big group of bottlenose. So that's the other thing too, right? Are these, which one's the mom, which one's the dad, and which one does the baby grow up with, kind of thing. So maybe bottlenose, although you have bottlenose stealing babies. So recently there was a bottlenose that stole, I think, a pilot whale baby.
Pilot whale.
Yeah. And apparently it's a thing they do. So bottlenose are kind of crazy. But
they're not all flipper guys.
Yeah. So anyway, I'll post those because the pictures are really interesting. You just like take the bottlenose off and just go, and that's what the face looks like.
That'd be cool to see.
Yeah.
We're going to end this one. Yeah, real quick. Just because when we were talking about doing Rissos dolphins, we all actually have seen Rissos dolphins at some point in life, which is really cool. So I think we were just going to end this one with our own little individual stories of where and how we saw Rissos dolphins, which would be kind of fun. Yeah. So I personally saw Rissos dolphins. I grew up in the Shetland Islands, for those of you who don't know, which are off the northeast tip of Scotland in the middle of the North Sea.
A little rock on the North Sea.
Yep, pretty much. And we were fortunate enough to have basically an inlet right below our house. So we would regularly have marine mammals coming in there. And we actually had a pod of Rissos dolphins come in there one time. So I ran down and had my little marine mammals of the world ID guide with me and got my binos
budding marine biologist cat.
Oh my gosh. I was like, I don't remember how old I was. I was maybe like 12. I can't remember. I was so proud of myself because I successfully ID'd them. And then when they had pictures posted in the local paper, they said they were common dolphins. And I was like, excuse me, what?
No.
That's absolutely not true. So I'm assuming a bunch of other people literally wrote a letter to the editor and was like, excuse me, they were absolutely not common dolphins. Like there was nothing that looked like common dolphins about
At
them.
all.
And
Like that's not one that's even close.
No, and I mean, like they were coming out of the water enough where you could see their head, like because I was like, what are these? This is really weird.
Well, and common dolphins generally have much more elongated.
They have an elongated
beak.
rostrum. Yeah, it was weird. So anyway, they did post a retraction of the week later, and I felt personally validated that my ID skills were acknowledged, even though I'm sure it wasn't just my letter. But it made
that might have been the solidification that yes, this is what I want to do, and I'm good at it, so I'm going to be a marine mammalogist. And now you are.
But
so
yeah, that's pretty cool.
Too. Oh, that's similar to mine too. When I saw them.
Go ahead.
Go for it.
Yeah, perfect.
I was in Monterey Bay, as one does, and I went to the Monterey Bay Aquarium, and so like we mentioned, Rissos tend to be deeper water dolphins, but
they can come to onto the coastal areas following prey. That is,
and
true.
They've actually been seeing it more often in Monterey Bay lately. Anywho, we were at the aquarium, which was a dream come true, and
great aquarium.
I saw Rissos from the aquarium, and
wow.
Yeah, I had the binos and was watching them for 5 minutes, and then went back inside because they left, and then probably 20 minutes later, then the dolphin alarm went off, and then they all went outside. And not to bash the Monterey Bay Aquarium, but the naturalist was telling us all about bottlenose dolphins.
Oh, well, probably because that's most likely the ones that would have been there, right?
Exactly, and it was just everything I could do not to say, actually, those are.
Excuse me.
I probably wouldn't have been able to stop myself. I would have been like, no, excuse me, this is wrong species.
But anyway, yeah, that was, we watched that for a little bit, and then we left the aquarium, and I don't know if it was the same pod or what, but about an hour later, we were watching the sea otters, because I haven't seen sea otters yet, and saw another pod, I don't know, 100 yards offshore.
Wow. Yeah, that's pretty close, because they'll come up to like the continental shelf and stuff, but getting that close.
That's when I didn't have the binoculars, so then well, that's obviously a Rissos, and then I think my mom and I just followed them for like 20 minutes down the coast, and the car like leapfrogged them. There they are.
Oh, cool.
That's
cool.
Really
neat.
And that goes to the power of what you can see from land. You don't always have to be out on the boat to see them. So my interaction was on a boat. So when I worked with the Wild Dolphin Project in Florida, the study site was in the Bahamas. So we would cross the Gulf Stream, and that is an area that not a lot of research is done in. And we actually wrote a paper about all the sightings that we've seen over the last like 20 years of going back and forth from the Bahamas, because not much is known about the animals there. But one of those times we were crossing the Gulf Stream, and this big pod of Rissos came and they bow rode on the bow. We have a catamaran. Cool. Yeah. And so it was just so cool because we got to see them like right up close, because they were right down below on the bow, and just seeing all the markings and stuff. And I think they tried to jump in the water to see if they would, stick around, because we have a permit to be able to do that. But I think they kind of took off after that. Like they didn't stay around. They were just like, oh, the boat's not moving. I don't want to play on your boat.
Right. Lame. Bye.
Right? Come on. But we had, it was probably like a 30 or 40 minute encounter of them on the boat, and just bow riding and kind of playing around the surface and stuff. So it was really cool. Yeah, to be able to see them so close. And that was one of the first few years I was there. So, and we, most of the time we cross the Gulf Stream and we don't see anything. So anytime we do, it's very exciting and always fun to be on the boat when that actually happens. So I was very, very happy to get to see that. So
yeah.
So those are our stories of our close encounters with Rissos or Rissos, depending on how you want to say it. So next time I guess we're going to give the gray seal another shot.
One last try. Yep.
Yeah,
I think let's do one last shot with a gray seal.
One last shot. Right.
They're super gnarly, guys.
They are.
I mean, we're going to get into it. If we do gray seals, there's a lot. I'm just saying, there's a lot.
And we will do it eventually if it doesn't win again, but we'll let it retire for a little bit and bring it back.
By God, we're doing it.
Yeah, definitely going to do it. So be on the lookout for that on the Instagram poll, and always follow us on Instagram and Facebook. And if you can also listen to us on a podcast here or on YouTube, depending on where you're listening to us right now. So be sure to stay in touch with us. And if you have anything that you guys want us to talk about, or a specific species that you'd like us to do, of course, just let us know. And we'd love to get your thoughts on that. All right. All right, so until next time, we'll have probably a journal review, I think. We are going to be starting to add in some interviews and stuff like that. We have some plans, some stuff, exciting stuff planned for the next few months. So keep an eye out, and we will see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.
This was brought to you by Pacific Mammal Research, a 501c3 nonprofit organization. To learn more about the species we discuss, check out our blog. Head to our website, www.pacmam.org, that's PACMAM.org, to check it out. Also, help us continue providing fun and educational content like this by donating today. Your help is how we can continue to do our work and share it with you. Thanks.